To our presentation, we are going to speak today about our digital mapping project. Sorry. There we go.
You have nothing on your calendar today, Sarah.
So we started this over the quarantine while everybody was forced to work remotely. As you may know, the archives and special collections are a very on-site type of endeavor. You know, most of our time is spent with the physical collections, organizing them, rehousing them, stabilizing them, scanning them. All of our work is basically related to our collections work on site. So when we went off site, we could keep ourselves busy for a while talking about our plans and organizing what we wanted to do and looking at helping to crunch the data from projects that we had done previously. But pretty soon we felt we need to reach out to our community digitally. So this was an amazing project that Sheridan Sales, the technical services archivist, who's my co-presenter, really initiated and came up with. So we're going to give a little tour of that, but I'm going to start with giving a bit of an overview to the digital projects we have already in the archives and how this mapping project fits in. So thank you for coming. Sheridan Sales, as I mentioned, is the technical services archivist. This means that she basically manages the processing of the collections. So when we get collections from donors, in many cases, they are a mess. We get boxes full of papers that have basically been emptied out of somebody's filing cabinet. And so it's Sheridan's job to organize all of this into a sensible pattern that will be useful to researchers and scholars. And I oversee special collections in the gallery that includes the university archives, the rare book collection, and the museum collections. So I'm going to start by talking about what we already do online and how this mapping project fits in. First, it's important to note that not everything will be digitized in an archives. Digital archival work is increasingly important, of course, as more and more of our lives move online, but there are some materials in archives that will never be digitized because they shouldn't be. When people empty out their collections, often after retirement or unfortunately a death, all kinds of things get put into an archive. Some of them are personal, love letters. Of course, as a university archives, we have a lot of materials that are school related, including students' papers, sometimes with grades on them that would fall under FERPA. So this sort of thing would never be digitized. We also have internal documents like institutional budgets. In the museum collections, we have many, many copyrighted works that can only be published with the permission of the artist. So there are many things, the majority of the things in the archives will not be digitized, although they will be able to be seen if you were to come to the archives in person and make an appointment. So this is just a bit of a legal differentiation that we have to make between what's available to a scholar that comes and sees it on a in-person basis because they have a particular research need versus what we're publishing online for the entire world to see. It's also important to note that there are many materials in the archives that have not yet been fully described. As I just mentioned, there are materials that we get that are in a terrible state, and it can, for a large, complex institutional collection, it could take years to process. So there are many materials that are not yet ready for digitization, but someday will be. So I'll talk about what we have online already in terms of the public that they serve. For scholars, since we're a university archives, that one of our main populations is the professors that work here and historians who specialize in this region, we publish hierarchical descriptions of collections called finding aids. These may be organized in a number of ways in order to best reflect the contents of the collection. And this is a way that we differ from our librarian colleagues and sometimes drive them crazy because archival collections vary so much. For a book, it's pretty straightforward. It has a title, it has an author, it has a publisher, it has contents that can be more or less categorized into regular. For archival collections, they are the Wild West. They could be organized in any number of ways and contain any number of things. So the principle that we use when we organize these collections is more or less how they were when they were active. So for an author's collections, we try to reflect how they were best kept, and that changes depending on the individual. So one of the collections that I started with when I first entered the field was the papers of Isaac Bashevis Singer, who the Nobel Prize winning author, who has his papers at the Ransom Center in Austin, Texas. So he kept his papers more or less organized by book. So he would have the drafts of the manuscript, the notes, any research that he did, and then the published work, and then reviews about that work. It was all organized together. So as we organized the collection, we reflected that order. For institutional records, we try to reflect the way that institution organized their work, and that can also be very idiosyncratic. I once worked with a collection that was a union of actors, many of whom worked in traveling theater troupes. And so the way this union organized their records was that they would keep it by town, because there were so many different acting troupes that would sort of be created and then disappear with the next season, that it made more sense to them to have the records organized by town. So they would say, okay, everybody who performed in Warsaw, we're going to keep their records in one folder. Everybody who performed in Minsk, we're going to keep their records in another folder. So that's how they organized it, and we reflected that in the final organization of the collection, because that tells scholars something about how the organization worked or how the person's mind worked. So this is the principle of original order. So in the very end, once we have everything organized, you'll see a finding aid that looks more or less like this. So you can see here, this is one of our favorite collections, the papers of the Seton family. So if you look on the left, there's a little narrative description that says what's in this collection, what you can find there. As you can see, it's quite diverse. There's drawings and engravings, holy cards and death notices, genealogical material, newspaper clippings, a prayer book, Elizabeth Seton's diary, as well as what you might expect more of, like correspondence and photographs. And you can see on the right that it's organized by person and family. So we have the person and then their records. And this is useful for scholars, so because they often have very specific needs. So they might say, okay, well, I'm really only interested in Lucy Jevons Hutton. So I'm just going to go straight to that section, and then I'll be able to find everything that I need. As you may surmise, this is a little much for the average person. So we also have blog posts and digital exhibits online that contextualize highlights from our collections. So you can see here, this is an excerpt from one of our recent digital exhibits. It's a tribute penny featuring Emperor Tiberius, a gift of Ronda Argenio. So these exhibits highlight works that are of wider interest, not necessarily something so specific that would just be of interest to a particular scholar, but things that really could grab the imagination of a wide group of people. So we have the Roman coin collection that you saw on the previous page. We recently did an exhibit of the papal bull of Pope Paul V in 1618. And this was a collaboration with retired Professor Peter R., which was really extraordinary because he's an expert in this period. So he told us so many things that we could feature, including about the Pope that actually wrote the papal bull, the Pope that was referenced in the ruling that the Pope that wrote this bull was referencing in his context, the order that it affected. Like, it really turned this one artifact into a glimpse of this entire world. So that was a fun one. We did digitize, in this case, the entire diary of a Seton Hall student from the 1870s. So this was a really extraordinary artifact that detailed the life of this one student who was a baseball player and a journalism student from the 1870s, who wrote about his time as a student, his efforts to find a job, his relationship with his father, who was not so sure about him going into journalism. So it was really a wonderful glimpse into the life of a student from the 19th century. I'd really like to, even though we have digitized this entire thing because we figured it would be interesting to a number of people, the next step for us is to actually transcribe it into typed text instead of handwriting, because as we know, students these days often struggle with handwriting. So it would make it even more accessible for students these days if we could actually type it up. So we also recently featured for Hispanic Heritage Month the papers of the Puerto Rican poet Trina Padilla de Sanz. This is an amazing collection that has photographs of her poetry, her correspondence. So it's a real treat for scholars of Hispanic poets, especially. We did a wonderful exhibit of the Theater in the Round collection. So this is the Theater in the Round that operates here at Seton Hall, and its history going back the last couple decades. We have an extraordinary number of photographs of their productions, in addition to programs and set designs and costume designs. We have some physical artifacts that came with the collection, including some set pieces that are really extraordinary. And the student who worked with this collection actually spent a lot of time writing this detailed timeline of when exactly all of these programs, all of the performances happened and who was in each one. So it's a great resource. And then finally, we recently did this collection on the Order Sons of Italy, an Italian heritage group that operated and gave us some really beautiful materials. So this is a good way for the general public to find things that'll be interesting to them to connect with, other than just digging through the finding aids. So with all this, you may be wondering, what is our new digital mapping project bringing? Well, it's a lot. So in contrast to these other experiences, which focus on particular objects, as you can see. So here's this coin, it's really cool, here's some more about it, you can learn about it. This allows people to experience our materials not in isolation like that, but in the context of the physical place where they were and where they existed during their active life cycle. It's also amazing because it's inclusive instead of separating these objects out as we do to care for them. So we sort of have books in one corner, paintings in the other, artifacts in another, digital materials in a third. This project, since it unites objects on the basis of place, brings all of them together so they can be seen in an organic relationship the way that they were when they were active. And then finally, this is a more, I think, engaging experience for our audience. Instead of reading a blog post, which is interesting, you discovered something new, but this could actually be the basis of a day's activity. You could use one of these tours that are being put together as an activity for the day. You could meet a couple of friends even today during the coronavirus. You could do it in a socially distanced way. You could, with your couple of friends, like go through the sites and see all the materials for themselves, learn about them through interacting with the map, and then perhaps have a socially distanced lunch together out on the green. This is a way for people to engage with our collections that's not just reading, but becomes an actual activity. So now I'll turn it over to my colleague Sheridan Sales to talk a little bit about how this project came together and what it does.
Thank you, Sarah. So what we are hoping to do during this time of COVID-19 is just look at some of our existing resources to see where our different strengths are and how we can kind of transform existing materials to be used in different ways. Next slide. So first, let me talk about the foundation of our digital mapping project, which is our South Orange Postcards collection. So with all of us inside, we got to look at these collections with a fine-tooth comb and see what are the highlights, what are things we can bring in different ways, and build from there. This link actually is to two different postcard collections that we combined in our institutional repository. Our institutional repository is where we house student theses, is where we house copies of the yearbook, and other resources that may not need a full archival finding aid like the Seton Jevons papers, but are still wonderful resources that we'd love to have online. Well, our South Orange postcard collection features materials primarily from the turn of the century, so 1880s to about 1910. We do have a few postcards that came from as late as the 1950s, but really it's a nice insight into what our campus looked like and even the community looked like 100 years ago. So most of the postcards are of South Orange and the but we do have some larger ones of the region. South Mountain Reservation, for example, is very heavily represented in this collection, and it just kind of goes all over our central to North Jersey region. I'm a Jersey transplant, so forgive me if my geography is a little off. In any case, in looking through this collection, we were able to find a number of unique locations, and especially of our South Orange campus, you can see that there is a really easy transition to looking at a few sites that were within walking distance. I actually took some time and wrote a little map based off of, okay, what do these locations look like? And was like, oh, we could literally do an in the past tour of Seton Hall using this system that's already online. Like, we've already got this collection online, let's just build from there. And we ended up reviewing with this goal in mind to get some sort of digital tour system. We ended up reviewing about 5 or so different systems to see what we could get, and ended up with CurateScape, which I will give a tour of in a minute, primarily because it meshed this online tour functionality with an exhibit structure that we felt could best showcase not only the postcards, but also flex our curatorial skills in making these things available. So once we decided on a system, I collaborated with our library collections developer to get the system into our network and also ensure that we had the data that we needed to import these sites. Next. So this was a process in getting everything together. I can show you the postcards in a minute if you're interested, but suffice it to say, we had a very minimum level of description of these different postcards. There were about 25 pages of, there were over 250 postcards I had to look at. We'll just keep it short and simple that way. And there is minimal details, or what we in the field called metadata, to let me know what was in each of these postcards. So first I had to see, what sites do we even have? And the challenge in this is that some of these changed over time. As an example, we have a postcard of Marshall Hall that's just described as the library according to the postcard. Well, that was the first of 3 libraries on campus, so I had to do some background research to see, like, okay, what actually, I know it's the library, but what building is it, and is it in the same spot on campus? And in the case of some South Orange community sites, some of the uses changed over time. Town Hall, for example, was at once Town Hall, makes sense, and also the fire department, and things moved around. So that was step 1, seeing what sites we have. Then I had to make sure, because this is a system that's built on digital mapping, that I could find a physical location. Some of them were more obvious. President's Hall hasn't really moved in the past 150 years, so great, there's President's Hall. Then I would find postcards that were horse drinking fountain. That's kind of out of fashion. We don't really have horses to travel us like to and from anymore. So I need to see, okay, well, let me look at the intersection of the streets, see if I can map that out. And for the most part, did pretty okay. Then there were some places that had been, due to development of South Orange Village, just entirely demolished. I did see a few houses like that, but for the most part, I could put everything together. Then our kind of final step, which, to be honest, I thought was kind of the fun part with the mapping, was working with our library collections developer to literally play with Google Street View to kind of match up the Google Street View with the image of the postcard and see, okay, this is the street view, this is the postcard, this is the exact GPS location of this spot. And as we develop the system further, I would like to take some of these moment in time postcards and make that its own tour. And then once we determined that everything could be mapped to their location, then we had to have enough description to make this worthwhile. I collaborated with our university archivist, who some of you have possibly worked with in the past, to get a kind of base level information to have enough to go off of that we could see a digital platform. One of the benefits of the system as well is it works well on web, so like at your computer screen. It also works well on mobile. So we need to figure out, okay, if someone's looking at this site with their phone, how much information is too much information, and just kind of match that up. So I will be working on that more in the future, but we at least got our minimum information up to upload to our system. Next. All right, so I'm going to take over the control of everything in a minute to, I'm getting control now, lucky me. So I will show you our digital mapping site and you can see what it looks like. And that is my email. Sorry about that. But this is our digital mapping site. So the URL, which you can see at the top, but I'll just read for everyone's benefit, is digitalmapping.shu.edu. And this is our front page. This is where everything is. So you can see right away that the primary foundation for this system is OpenStreetMap. It's very similar to Google Maps, but is open source, so we can play with mapping a little differently. And also a digital exhibit software called Omeka. That is also open source, so we get to have a little bit more fun with how we play with this system. But primarily, it's just exhibit plus mapping combined. Now, one interesting thing about this system, which I'll kind of show here below, is that instead of location, it is built on something called a story. So the benefit of having this story functionality is we can get a little more flexible with what a location means. Does a location mean a landform? Does a location mean a building? I've seen other people use this system where a location is a person because this person was born on this site, or this person gave a speech at this site. So events, people, there's many ways that story can be applied. And we're hoping that as we collaborate not only internally with the archives, but also our gallery as well, who has objects around campus that they can include, we can get a little bit more flexible with this and kind of have some fun. And beyond the flexibility of the story functionality, I'll just open one site real quick, the South Orange Fire Department, is there's a lot of ways for us to get points of access to this, to the materials. There's a search bar up here, so if you really want to see President Hall, you can just search President Hall, boom, we're done. We have our stories, which you can look at as well. You can choose by map location. I'll show that in a bit. But also you can see here we have subjects and tags. So subjects is what's called controlled vocabulary. So basically, I'm not going to say all archivists huddled into a room and we decided what each word should mean. That's a bit silly. We didn't exactly do that. However, we have come up with some main interest terms. We can say, oh, someone who is looking this site might be interested in local history. Let's put our local history with the tag, and this way all of those can be found at once. Now, I'm just going to show real quick our mapping functionality. Pretty user-friendly. You can get a preview out from itself. Speaking of demolished properties, let's go to South Orange proper. Take out our memorial flagpole. Lots of points of entry. And even if you want to go see the site itself, because it has a mapping plugin, it will connect to Google. And for some reason, Google thinks I live in Newark, but we're going to ignore that for now. It will give me an exact location of how I can get to this site. Lastly, which we found most exciting, is the tour functionality. So this is kind of a, test round. I'm still building out the exact content of this, but we identified a couple locations where you can, literally go in person if you want to use those direction tools to physically get there, but we can connect all of these different historic Seton Hall sites. I'm going to add more description when I actually have a minute to breathe. But we can go around, collect all of our sites from local campus history. You can jump around to see how things have changed over time. Or you can just start from the beginning. See what images we have, and slowly click forward, and slowly click forward. As a funny note, we've even incorporated our site into our U-Life tour. So our university freshmen are currently looking for little 8-bit monsters, and we've hidden ours within this site. So this was a very easy connection for us, to build this historic tour so students could see what campus looked like 100 years ago, while they're also learning about the different services the library offers. So that is it. I will turn it over to Sarah right now to pick up with our next steps.
All right, so the last thing we wanted to talk about was how you can get involved. So since this is a resource that aims to document Seton Hall, we very much welcome and encourage collaboration from the community. If you have your own photographs of sites on campus, or you have memories of events that happened, this site actually supports the integration of audio files. So if you wanted to record yourself narrating an event that happened at Bailey Hall or at Mooney Hall years ago, we could actually take that recording, upload it to the site, attribute it to you, and it would be available for people to use in the future and to be incorporated into the history of the site. So we're looking for input at this point, since the platform is up and running, and our next step is to really populate it with content. So the more input we get from our community, the better this resource will be for everyone. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions and see if anybody has any questions or anything we can clarify. Nothing so far?
And if nothing comes to you right away, you can contact us at any point with further questions. Do you still have our contact information slide, Sarah?
Yes, I'll put that up right now.
So if anything comes to mind later on, you can always contact us.
Yes.
A little frozen so you can see me mid-discussion, but that's okay.
Oh, this doesn't have our emails? Sorry, I'll put it. Is it at the end? Ah, here we go.
It's just frozen on your share screen.
Oh, you can't see it? Sorry. Technical problems. Okay, I'll stop sharing and then reshare. Okay. You see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this resource could really be exploited in a number of ways. Like Sheridan mentioned, we're looking at developing a tour of artistic sites around campus. There's a number of extraordinary paintings, statues, of course, the statue of Elizabeth Ann Seton. We'll put together a tour that highlights some of those. We're also working on a hiking site that will feature sites in South Mountain, right, Sheridan?
Mm-hmm. A couple of different historic sites in South Mountain Reservation. We did that on purpose, so if any students want to take a day, go hiking, that's a nice activity that allows for social distancing, but also at the same time lets our students be active. Shows our bridle path and other different sites in South Mountain, including the Glens. So those have been kind of roughly tagged with their location within South Mountain. So a student could, in theory, walk to that location, or anyone could walk to that location, and then see that exact site 100 years ago.
Yeah, we think this will be a really great way for people who are not able to physically be on campus right now because they're remote learning, or they might be needing to stay home for health reasons. It's a way for them to really get to know the campus, not only as it is today, but its history, so that when they do come, when we are able to be together again on campus, they'll come with a sense of familiarity and comfort. All right, well, thank you very much for coming. Last chance for questions. All right, if not, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.
Oh, we do have just a thank you, and from Jennifer O'Sheal. Thank you to everyone who joined the session. You can view all Seton Hall presentations at our on-demand page, and there are more virtual sessions today and tomorrow. So please visit shu.edu